Hey everyone, welcome back to the Incredible India podcast series. I'm Sam,
And I'm Taylor.
and today we are diving deep into a city that I think for most people is just a place you drive through. Panjim, or Panaji, the capital of Goa.
It really is. It's often treated as just a blur, isn't it? For so many visitors, Panjim is, where the airport road hits the coast, or maybe where you find the casinos on the river.
Right?
But our source material, it argues that the city is actually a profound study in cultural endurance and urban adaptation.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to get past that pass-through idea. We've been looking at sources from urban planning, cultural history, sociology,
All centered on one simple idea.
that Panjim has to be experienced slowly, preferably on foot. We want to understand the city not just as a place, but as a living system that's, well, designed for human connection.
Exactly. We're looking for the principles here. How does a planned colonial city manage to not just survive, but thrive, especially when its predecessor completely collapsed? The goal is to see how local life sort of absorbed and reshaped a foreign structure.
Okay, so let's start with that history. Panjim wasn't always the capital. That was old Goa. But the official switch happened back in 1843. This wasn't just a political move, was it?
No, not at all. Far from it. That move is actually central to why Panjim works. Old Goa, for all its huge churches and grand scale, had become, well, it was doomed.
Doomed.
Epidemiologically doomed. It suffered these catastrophic recurring outbreaks of disease, things directly tied to poor sanitation, stagnant water, just awful living conditions.
So the city was literally killing its own people.
It was. And if you look into historical studies of tropical colonial cities, you see this pattern again and again. These crowded settlements, they were public health nightmares. So colonial powers had to abandon them and build these clean, planned replacements.
And Panjim was that replacement. The clean slate.
A very calculated, almost clinical replacement.
Which sounds so structured. I mean, Panjim was laid out on a blueprint, right?
Yeah.
A classic colonial grid. Wide streets, clear administrative zones. The works.
Total order was the goal. But here's where the urban planning research we looked at gets really insightful. Most of these purely grid-based cities really struggled. They were designed on paper, in Europe, with no thought for the local climate, the intense heat, or the local social patterns. They just weren't suited for the environment.
So it was a formula for failure, but Panjim worked. Why? What made it different?
Adaptation. It was driven entirely by the people living there. The grid provided the skeleton, but the Goan way of life, that provided the muscle and skin.
How so?
Well, the buildings themselves started to soften those rigid lines. Houses quickly grew these very local features. Deep shaded verandas, big overhanging balconies, internal courtyards.
Things that helped the city breathe, so to speak.
Exactly. It allowed the city to breathe in the heat. And those wide, straight streets, originally just for military drills and transit, they were taken over by the residents. They became social spaces, places to talk, to linger in the evening. The local habits just melted the rigidity of the plan.
That shift from structure to socialization. That's a perfect way to walk into the most famous part of Panjim, Fontainhas, the Latin Quarter. It's the polar opposite of a rigid grid.
Fontainhas is the living proof of that adaptation. And it's famous, of course, for those stunning, brightly painted houses. The yellows, the blues, the reds.
And most people, myself included, would just look at that and think, oh, that's charming. Just aesthetics.
But it's so much more than that. The cultural historians we read point to a very practical science behind it. First, the traditional lime-based paints were brilliant at reflecting the intense tropical heat.
Okay, that makes sense.
But more than that, the repainting itself was a cultural ritual. It was tied to the monsoon cycle. Refreshing those colors was a sign of maintenance, of resilience against the elements.
So a pea job was a civic duty. That's fascinating. But the layout. Why does Fontainhas feel so much more organic than the rest of the city?
Because it is. It gets its name from a natural spring, the Fountain of Phoenixes. And environmental geography shows us this is the classic pattern for settlements everywhere. You cluster around your water source. The lanes just follow the natural shape of the land.
So the land dictated the layout, not a planner with a ruler.
Precisely. And that creates what we call a human-scaled neighborhood. The streets are too narrow for cars to rush through. They force you to walk slowly. And then you notice the closeness of it all. The doors open right onto the street.
That proximity seems almost invasive by modern standards.
But urban sociology tells us that relationship is incredibly important. When you blur the line between your home and the public street, You foster amazing social cohesion. You can't just ignore your neighbor. The architecture itself forces these small daily interactions. It builds community.
So the streets create the social fabric. Let's look at the structures that anchor it. We have to talk about Panjim's biggest landmark, the Church of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, sitting way up on that hill.
Its placement is definitely strategic. It's a classic European move, right? Put the church on the highest ground to project spiritual authority over the city. You can see it from everywhere.
But again, it's not just for show. What makes its role in Panjim so unique?
Ask a local, and they might say the most important part isn't the church itself, but that huge sweeping staircase leading up to it.
The steps.
The steps. In the evenings, they completely transform. They become public seating, a meeting spot, a place for vendors, a viewpoint to watch the city.
So it stops being just a path to worship and becomes real civic infrastructure.
That is the key insight. The religious studies sources point out that these urban churches, they act as true civic anchors. They do more than just hold services. They mark time with their bells, they structure the year with festivals, and they provide this crucial public space that isn't commercial. Faith isn't separate, it's woven right into the daily routine of the city.
Okay, we've covered the structural anchors. Let's move to, well, sustenance anchors. Food. The morning ritual of delivering the traditional bread, the pound, is mentioned everywhere as this powerful constant.
And that pound delivery, it's so much more than just nostalgia. It's actually a key piece of anthropological evidence.
The bread is evidence. Tell me more.
Food anthropology research shows pretty consistently that culinary habits are maybe the single most persistent cultural practice we have.
More than architecture.
Yeah.
Or language.
Far more reliably, yes. They survive political change, colonialism, economic shifts. The ingredients and the rituals get passed down, and they create this direct link between the present and the past.
So the fact that pão is still delivered every morning in Panjim, it means that tradition outlasted the Portuguese government itself.
Precisely. It's an unbroken cultural line, and the places that sell it, the little bakeries, the quiet cafes, they function as these informal social hubs.
You can just picture it. The smell of the bread, the steam from the chai, the quiet murmur of the city waking up.
That's the scene. Conversations start there and news gets shared. It's a perfect example of how a foreign-influenced bread-making was completely absorbed and localized into the Goan routine. It's integration, not imposition.
We've gone from the intense social world of Fontainhas to these quiet morning rituals. Let's zoom out now to the administrative areas and the waterfront. There's a real shift in the feel of the city here.
A huge one. The administrative buildings, the courts, the government offices, they are a sharp contrast. They're functional, restrained, almost deliberately plain. They reflect the priorities of a working capital: order, bureaucracy, control.
They're the quiet backdrop to the city's color and noise.
Exactly, the essential scaffolding. And that leads you right to the Mandovi riverfront, the most open part of the city.
Now, traditionally, a colonial waterfront was all about commerce and control, moving goods, projecting power.
It was. But in Panjim, the promenade has become a pure leisure space. You just see people watching the boats, enjoying the sunset. They're observing the river, not trying to control it.
And what does that act of observation do for a city?
Well, environmental psychology studies show that being near large, open bodies of water actually lowers stress. It encourages reflective thinking. So the promenade becomes Panjim's collective space for contemplation. It balances out the busy social life of the inner lanes.
Which brings us right back to where we started, the importance of walking, why you have to explore Panjim on foot.
It's all about speed, the speed of your observation. Heritage research makes this clear. Moving at human speed allows for what they call micro-observations.
Micro-observations. What does that mean in Panjim? What are we looking for?
It's the tiny details that reveal the real character of the city. It could be a small, beautifully maintained shrine built right into the wall of a house, or a faded, hand-painted sign for a shop that's been there for 80 years, or just noticing the way a family uses their balcony as an extension of their living room.
These are things a guidebook will never tell you.
Never. But they are the true definition of Panjim's spirit. Taking a slow, thoughtful walk lets you read the city like a living document, not just tick off a list of monuments.
The city's resilience isn't in one big church, then.
No, it's in the sum of all those small, persistent daily routines. It proves that human habits will always, eventually, reshape even the most rigid designs.
So what does this all mean for us, for you, listening? I think the deeper lesson here is that planning can create a structure, but true cultural endurance is found in how people adapt that structure. Rigid plans always yield to local habits. Longevity isn't in the monuments, it's in the small stuff. The color of the paint, the daily bread, the shared space on the church steps.
The challenge for you then is next time you're in any city, your own hometown even, just put the map away for a bit. Try walking slowly and look for those micro-observations. The tiny details the guidebooks miss, but that truly define the city's character.
A perfect challenge to leave you with. If you decide to travel to Goa, we have a recommendation. 5 Senses Tours organizes tours across India which are immersive cultural experiences. You can email contact@5sensestours.com. Note 5 is written as a numeral and contact at 5sensestours.com or WhatsApp 2+919 845 677 446.